Just by way of quick introduction, 603 Alliance is a New Hampshire grassroots organization. Our mission is to restore constitutional principles at all levels of government. We're an all-volunteer organization, and a lot of our activities are focused on recruiting, training, and enabling candidates to run for state representative. We've trained over 150 candidates in the 2018 and 2020 cycles. We've held a number of events, including a Trump inaugural ball where we raised $5,000 for the Liberty House in Manchester for homeless veterans. We have hosted a number of events with prominent figures from across New Hampshire and across the country. So if you'd like to learn more about the 603 Alliance, if you'd like to sign up for email updates, you can go to 603alliance.org. So a quick overview of our agenda this evening. Dr. Karlyn Borysenko is going to be talking about what is happening in New Hampshire with critical race theory. What is it? What are some of the things that she is seeing around the state and around the country? Representative Keith Ammon is going to be talking about House Bill 544, and he'll give us an update on the status of that bill and what it says and what it does not say. Lily Tang Williams will be talking about her perspectives on how this mirrors events in Mao's China and the Cultural Revolution. Karlyn will then be talking about how to talk to people about critical race theory. How do you share this information and be effective in doing that? And then finally, we'll talk about a call to action. We'll have a few wrap-up items, and then we'll handle questions at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Karlyn Borysenko. She is a nationally recognized author, speaker, and political commentator. I believe her website says that she is an accidental political commentator. She really first made waves about a year ago when she attended a Trump rally and was warned that that was a dangerous place to go and bad things might happen. She discovered a very different perspective and has written articles for Forbes and Medium. She's appeared on the Glenn Beck program multiple times. She has been prominently featured in the Walkaway Movement, the Rubin Report, and a number of other outlets. So Karlyn, take it away.
Well, thank you, Jim. And I'm going to take over sharing for a second and get this up and running. Hang on one sec. Okay. Just trying to find my slides. There it is. Okay. There are my slides. All right. So, one of the things that Jim didn't tell you in my introduction is, it is true that I accidentally rose to prominence because I was a Democrat for 20 years that attended a Trump rally and discovered how much the media was lying to me. But what Jim didn't tell you is my road to attending that Trump rally as a Democrat actually started with critical race theory. And it started in the most unexpected of places. Critical race theory actually took over my knitting community. And that's knitting with the yarn and the needles because, this is a true story. These roving gangs of social justice warriors were going around the knitting community, bullying and mobbing people and trying to make them say certain words and do certain things with their businesses. And it was just a really horrible experience. And that was my first introduction to what critical race theory was. That happened almost 2 years ago now. And I have been trying to understand and fight back against this ideology ever since, because I truly believe that critical race theory is an existential crisis in this country. It is something that everyone needs to be concerned about. If you haven't encountered it yet, and frankly, I would be surprised if many people on the webinar hadn't encountered it in some way, shape, or form, you will encounter it at some point. So let me just give you a brief overview of what critical race theory is, and then I'm going to show you some examples, both nationally of how it shows up in the workplace and also in schools. And then I'm going to show you some examples in New Hampshire. And then I'm actually going to walk you through a real example of how teachers in schools indoctrinate children into this ideology, so that you can actually see how it works firsthand. So critical race theory is a fringe ideology that started in academia in the 1970s. It has absolutely no legitimate academic backing. It comes out of like gender studies units in universities, which really are not academically rigorous and peer reviewed and as much as we might like them to be. But still, this theory has been around for a while, and it has been slowly gaining ground over time. But it really shot to prominence after George Floyd's death this past year, when all of a sudden critical race theory was everywhere. Every organization was doing anti-racist training. Schools started started infusing it into curriculums and classrooms for children as young as 5 years old. And the basic premise of critical race theory is that it starts with the assumption that everything is racist. Everything. The question is not if racism occurred. The question is always how racism occurred. So their contention is that racism exists everywhere, in every institution, in every person, every government system, every school system, everywhere. And the job of the critical theorist is to discover where the racism occurred and how it occurred. Now, this is what they mean by systemic racism, that it is everywhere. One of the basic premises of critical race theory, and they are actually quite overt about this. This is not something that you have to read between the lines. They say it flat out, is that if you are born white, you are born racist. And not only were you born racist, but you will be racist your entire life. And your only job as a white person in critical race theory is to do the work to unravel your inherent racism. What I just described is the premise of one of the best-selling books of the last year. It's called White Fragility. It's by Robin DiAngelo. And in that book, she literally writes that she has been racist since the womb and describes many instances of how she's a racist throughout the book. Now, a common question I get about critical race theory, and I just want to get it headed off at the pass, is parents oftentimes will say to me, well, what if my children are biracial, or what if I'm biracial? Now, I can actually tell you exactly how critical theory will handle biracial children when it comes to schools, because I've sat in on more critical race theory trainings than I care to admit. And what they actually teach teachers in regards to children who are biracial is they teach them to tell the children not to identify with the white part of themselves, because the white part of themselves is the oppressor. So they don't want to identify with the white parent. The white parent is the oppressor. Only the parent of color is who they want to identify with, which, you know, I'll let you have your own conclusions about what harm that might do. Now, one of the things that you'll hear from critical theorists is this is about social justice, this is about fairness, this is about justice. Let me assure you, this ideology has nothing to do with fairness and justice. It is all about power. They are not interested in listening to any voices that do not align with their ideology. So you might hear them say, listen to Black voices. As a white person, it's your job to shut up and listen to Black voices. Well, that doesn't include Black voices that are conservative. It doesn't include Black voices who disagree with them. In fact, Jim mentioned I was part of the walkaway movement. I actually did, I traveled with the walkaway movement for the entire back half of 2020. And one of the things we did is we did a rally in Chicago, right outside of Wrigley Field. Almost all of, I was actually the token white person in this rally. All of our speakers were Black. Black Lives Matter showed up to protest our rally. They were beating our drums to try to drown out the voices of our speakers. And they were literally drowning out Black voices when this was happening. So they are not interested in fairness or justice or elevating Black voices. They are only interested in using this ideology to gain power. And one of the ways, and I want to just give a couple examples of this. So during the COVID pandemic, when it very first started, the critical theorists got extremely quiet. It was actually the most peaceful time that I've had since I started studying this ideology. They got very, very quiet. You want to know why? Because all of a sudden, the world had a real problem to deal with. Critical theory likes to elevate things, call them problematic, that are not real problems. They're made up just to gain power. But all of a sudden, when the pandemic first started, they got very quiet because there were real things going on. Well, that lasted up until the death of George Floyd. And then they used that, they took advantage of a tragedy to shoot off and to try to indoctrinate this ideology in as many places as they possibly could. They absolutely were waiting for something to take advantage of so that they could regain power in the situation. We actually have seen this very, very recently with Asian Americans as well. And Lily's going to talk a little bit more about that. But Asian Americans in the oppression hierarchy and critical race theory usually aren't actually that high up, because Asian Americans tend to do really well in school. They tend to break the mold of what critical race theory views as oppressed. And so actually leading up to the shooting in Atlanta that happened a couple weeks ago now, I guess, I had actually started seeing a trend of more and more news stories coming out trying to convince Asians that they were oppressed. And I was like, what is going on? What is it with these news stories that all of a sudden we're trying to convince Asians they're oppressed? Well, guess what was happening? Asians were starting to fight back against critical race theory, because, as Lily's going to tell you more about, they understand what the Cultural Revolution was like in China. And so there are many Asian and especially Chinese American groups that are fighting back against this. And so the critical theorists were trying to convince them that they were oppressed, to try to bring them back into the fold. And then this shooting happened in Atlanta. Again, they're taking advantage of a tragedy. And that's why we see all of these Stop Asian Hate protests popping up. Because what we know from the FBI is that the number one group that targets Asians is actually African Americans. It's not white people, but they're going to be talking about how it's all about white supremacy. It's a load of nonsense. It's just about gaining power. Now, I don't want to get too much into that. I just want to give you a brief overview, though. Some of the words to watch out for if you want to know if you're looking at critical race theory. You're going to be looking for books like White Fragility, How to Be an Anti-Racist. You're going to hear words like social justice, equity as opposed to equality, white privilege, oppressor, oppressed, power plus privilege. That's their definition of racism. You're going to hear anti-racist a lot. You're going to hear systemic racism. You're going to hear Black Lives Matter, Asian Lives Matter. Anytime you hear any of these keywords, you are almost always looking at critical race theory. All right, let's dig into it and look at some examples. Now, here is a story. You guys may have heard about the Coke Be Less White training. I actually broke this story about a month ago. I got these documents from a whistleblower inside of Coke. And basically, Coke employees were required to take a training that literally, if we look down here in the lower right-hand corner, that told them to try to be less white. This was a required diversity training, but it's actually even worse than that, because this training was taking place on the LinkedIn Learning platform, which meant that not only were Coca-Cola employees using this, but thousands of companies across the United States are using this training with their employees, telling them that white people are oppressive, arrogant, certain, defensive, ignorant, not humble. They don't listen. They basically, what Robin DiAngelo, and this is actually all based on the work of Robin DiAngelo, what she has done is take every negative caricature, I was going to say caricature, which is not quite right, but perhaps closer than I might like, character trait, and assign it to white people. That's what effectively they've done. Here's a second example. This is from Sandia National Laboratories. This was a story broken by Christopher Rufo. And this is actually a federal government contractor. This is a company that is in charge of maintaining our nuclear arsenal. And what they actually did was, you see this photo, this is a group of their white male executives. They literally segregated their white male executives because segregation is good under critical race theory. They brought them out to a 3-day retreat in the middle of Arizona. You can see the White Men's Caucus right up here. And they were forced to admit their inherent racism. They were forced to apologize for their racism. They were forced to say that men are only interested in power and men have all this privilege. And if you look here, this is actually letters of apology. To what this says is, please write a short message directed to white women, people of color, and other groups regarding the meaning of the caucus experience to you. They actually forced this group of highly experienced, competent executives, because they're white men, to write letters of apology for being white men, even though their behavior may have done nothing wrong. This is a company that's in charge of maintaining our nuclear arsenal. Most recently, this is something that came out of Cigna, one of the largest healthcare providers in the world, where they had employees do a training that told them that they were no longer allowed to use words or terms like brown bag lunch, hey guys, you're so articulate. They're not allowed to use the terms wives, husbands, boyfriends, girlfriends, because it's gendered. Critical race theory does not like gendered language at all. They're not allowed to say mothering or fathering. I had a crazy day, man hours, mankind. They're not allowed to say all of these terms anymore. And the reasons that they're given, if you look at the social or societal norms checklist, is they say that anyone who does not have a disability is, of a certain age. If you're a Christian, you have religious privilege. This, by the way, this religious privilege thing is going to be the next part of critical race theory. So if you are a Christian, congratulations. I'm sure you didn't know that you were privileged because of your faith. If you are a man, you're privileged. If you're heterosexual, you're privileged. If you are in a certain social class, and of course, if you are white, you have all the privilege in the world and everyone else is oppressed. Let's look at some school systems. So these are slides. This is from a class called Sociology of Change. This was at a charter school out in Las Vegas, Nevada. I actually broke this story as well. This mother, basically, there's a mother of a 17-year-old. Her name is Gabrielle Clark. Her son was required to take this class in order to graduate. And this class is ridiculous on a number of levels, but let me just point out a few quick things. The teacher in the class was teaching that the traditional family reinforces racist and homophobic prejudices, that religion reinforces homophobic prejudices, that wage gaps exist, which they do not. They have been proven not to exist for quite some time, and that the government promotes stereotypes and prejudices. They were teaching that racism equals prejudice plus power, therefore people of color cannot be racist. In this ideology, only white people can be racist. No one else can be. And the students were required to do an independent reflection in which they were required to list the different parts of their identities and then label themselves as either an oppressor or oppressed. And this slide down here at the bottom, this is actually the teacher. The teacher was using herself as an example for the class. So she was listing her sexual orientation, her disabilities, her religion, all these things. Now, this was all required of the students as well. And this has actually gotten the school in some trouble because the mother of this, Gabrielle Clark, is now suing the school over forcing her son to take this class. And a judge has recently issued a statement, I suppose, saying that this lawsuit has a really good chance of succeeding. So if this stuff is not taken out of schools soon, we're going to start seeing an awful lot more lawsuits, and we're about to have a precedent in that regard. Here's an example from Arizona. Arizona's Department of Education is teaching people that white children and white children only start to become racist when they are 3 years old. And if you'll see here, this sentence says, silence about race reinforces racism by letting children draw their own conclusions about what they see. They are not in favor of allowing children to draw their own conclusions. They're not in favor of allowing adults to draw their own conclusions either. Everyone has to be educated in the very specific ideology of critical race theory. Here's another example. Nebraska's Department of Education's new health standards teaches gender identity to kindergarteners, to 5-year-olds. They're starting to infuse lessons about you might not be the actual sex in which you were born to children as young as 5 years old. And they're doing this without their parents' knowledge, and they're doing it without their parents' permission. And that's in a red state of Nebraska. This is one of the most shocking ones that I've seen, and then we'll get into some New Hampshire examples. This is actually something that was sent home to parents in a school system in New York, in which they taught parents that their goal should be to become a white traitor or a white abolitionist. And anything less than becoming a white traitor, or maybe you could get away with being white critical, but anything else had you in the land of white supremacy. So these are the options that white parents have. You can be a white supremacist or you can be a white traitor. Those are the choices that you get. Now, let's get into some examples from New Hampshire. This is a webinar conducted by the University of New Hampshire. If you want to watch this webinar, it is up. I have it up on YouTube. Anyone can see it, in which this presenter taught white employees, because again, these trainings are always segregated. They taught white employees that their role as white people was to show up, shut up, support your black and brown colleagues, and to school yourself, which is another word for educate yourself. And that's what these people always say, is the role of white people is to shut up and listen to the black and brown voices and to educate yourself. And that is the role that you play if you want to be anti-racist. Now, UNH actually also had another webinar just yesterday in which they were actually campaigning against HB 544. I have not had a chance to watch the whole webinar, but I will actually be watching it live on my YouTube channel tomorrow if anyone wants to come and hang out. But I thought that this was pretty funny. They actually had a whole webinar because of our public awareness that we're trying to do to describe what they really mean by critical race theory. And one of the presenters in this webinar actually testified in opposition to the bill when it was in committee, and he flat out said that he believes that capitalism is the result of slavery. Now, moving on to another university, we have Southern New Hampshire University. And I'll tell you what, Southern New Hampshire University, with all their money that they have to play with, they've gone above and beyond in the critical race theory department. They actually have a 5-year plan in which they're creating a whole shared language of diversity and inclusion. And they have all these worksheets that their employees have to do. Here's an example of it. They have a whole guidebook. This is pre-work, which requires employees to identify their unconscious bias. Now, part of why critical race theory is able to say that all white people are racist is that they say, well, we all have unconscious bias that we are just not aware of, and we have to identify those bias in order to be able to do the work to defeat racism. And so they have all these worksheets to help employees do that. And then what I actually loved about this one is this little box down here at the bottom in which they say, during an upcoming one-on-one with your leader, discuss how you are planning to approach your areas of unconscious bias and ways in which you will recognize your bias are occurring. They're actually requiring managers to basically be therapists, which is something that none of them are required to do. And when you bring this type of thing into a work environment, you're just asking for trouble. It's going to result in people calling each other out for their inherent racism all the time. And actually, right before we got on the call, I actually got whistleblower documents from another person at SNU, which basically shows that SNU's not really a big fan of free speech. They kind of say that free speech is great, but sometimes speech needs an intervention when it's not the speech that they want. So I thought that that was pretty funny. We had this story in the New Hampshire Journal just last week. Manchester schools mandate anti-whiteness training for employees. So if you had any questions about whether or not this was in schools that your kids might attend, well, the answer is it is. And I've got some more examples coming up. But Manchester schools actually mandated this anti-whiteness training. Employees were required to go on and do this webinar called "What is White Privilege Really?" Manchester schools is now denying that they mandated this training, but it was kind of like once they were found out, they denied it and said, oh, it's just optional. Now, that's actually a really common excuse that these people will use. They say, this isn't mandated training. It's just optional. But you know what happens when you don't do it? You're going to be called a racist by your colleagues forever for not doing it, and you might actually end up losing your job. Here's an email from the Exeter School District, and you can see it's from the Exeter School District right down here, Exeter Region Cooperative School District, and this is providing all sorts of information. This is sent out under the guise of all of this anti-Asian bias is coming up, and people have disdain for the Asian culture because of those horrible conservatives that were talking about how COVID came from China. And here's a list of anti-racist activities that you can do to make sure that you're checking your anti-Asian bias. Here's the website from the schools in Holderness. Holderness actually has this is all public. This is all on Holderness's website. And one of the bullet points they have here is, we will integrate concepts of social justice, specifically notions of empathy and fairness throughout our curriculum, seeking to promote an understanding of how to learn and lead a complex, interconnected world, and to educate our students towards a richer humanity. Holderness is telling you that they are integrating social justice throughout their curriculum. Here's what's going on in Concord. Concord schools are actually having their teachers do professional development around anti-racism, and any professional development that happens with teachers will make its way into the classroom. So here are just two examples of professional development opportunities for people in the Concord School District. They've got this diversity, equity, and inclusion resources, and anytime you hear the word equity, it's critical race theory. And then we got this video, deepening your understanding of race and tools for anti-racist teaching. Same rule with anti-racist. Anytime you hear the term anti-racist, critical race theory. All right, I want to just end this this section by showing you exactly how they indoctrinate your children. Now, this is all from a video I got from a 14-year-old 8th grader in Fairfax County, Virginia. This student watches my videos on YouTube, and when this unit came up in his class, he actually had the presence of mind to hit that record button and send me the video. The full video for this class is up on my YouTube channel, so if you want to go and see it for yourself, you're more than welcome. But here's the general process that they did in about 20 minutes in this class. So first, they talked about the Pledge of Allegiance and how the last line in the Pledge of Allegiance is, "and justice for all." And then they had the kids write about what they thought fairness and justice meant. What does this mean in the Pledge of Allegiance? So they're trying to equate it with something good that the children understand. Once they do that, they introduced the concept of social justice by contrasting what and justice for all means with injustice. So they're saying justice is a good thing, injustice is a bad thing. You want a fair world, don't you? Don't you want justice? You don't like injustice. Injustice is unfair. Next up, they introduce the idea of privilege and equate it to justice. So if you want things to be fair, then we have to acknowledge that some people have more privilege than others. And it's just not fair that some people have more privilege than others, right? And what I want you to notice in this one is this slide down in the corner over here. Let me make that a little bit bigger for you. This is a cartoon they commonly use that differentiates between equality and equity. Critical race theory does not like equality. Critical race theory likes equity. And the difference is equality of opportunity. Equality is the idea, and I think every single one of us can agree with this, that everyone should have access to the same opportunities regardless of your race or your gender or your skin color or your sexual orientation or any of that. I think that that's a good thing to strive for. Critical race theory doesn't like that, though. They want equity, which is all about equality of outcomes. They think that no matter how hard you work, no matter how much intelligence you have, if you're going to show up or if you're going to sleep in all day, everyone should have equality of outcomes. This is a fundamentally Marxist ideology that is very literally leading people down the path towards communism, but they're teaching it to kids in 8th grade. And I'm going to read you a passage. This is actually what the teacher said when they were looking at the slide. She said, say you have two people who are hungry and you can give them both a Big Mac. Does that mean they are equal because you gave them the same thing? Does that make them equal? The students answered yes, that if two people both get a Big Mac, that's equal. Well, then the teacher says, say you have two people who are hungry and you can give them both a Big Mac, but one of them needs more than one Big Mac to be full. Does that still make them equal? If two people get a Big Mac, but one of them needs more than one Big Mac to have a full stomach, does that make them equal? And then she basically guides the students to saying, no, it's actually more fair to give one person 2 Big Macs and the other person 1 because that's what they need. That's this whole idea of equality of outcomes. Once they do that, they come back to this idea of privilege and they say, again, if you want things to be fair, then you have to want to get rid of privilege in society. And then they introduce the idea of systemic racism because systemic racism to them is related to privilege. And then finally, they introduce that idea of social justice. And they say, social justice is just about making things fair. It's about ending discrimination. And then they have the kids do a little write-up about what they just learned. So that's a really quick overview. But again, if you want to see this happening in real time, I have the video up on my YouTube channel. Oh, and as a bonus exercise, they get to play oppression bingo. So you have to, in this bingo game, it's not like the normal ones. In this one, you have to identify all the areas in which you are privileged or you are an oppressor. And I guess whoever gets the most wins or something, or probably loses in the land of critical race theory. Now, one last thing I want to say on this before I pass it over to Keith. You might ask why parents stand for this and why they're not fighting back. Well, let me tell you this. The teachers in the schools are not your friends. The teachers are writing articles about how much they hate it when parents teach their children that all of this is nonsense. They hate it when parents are red pilling their children and teaching them that this is not the way the world works. And in fact, some teachers are actually compiling lists of parents to go to war with them. This was reported just last week on the Daily Wire. Teachers compile a list of parents who question racial curriculum, plot war on them. So this is happening in the real world. The teachers are not working with the parents anymore. They're working against you. And I'm going to tell you this. I look at these curriculums all day, every day. Most teachers are fully indoctrinated into this ideology. So please watch what your kids are learning. Watch those Zoom classes. Make sure you're looking at their homework because it is not the same school system in which you all grew up in. And that's all I have. I'll pass it back over to Keith. That's it.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate that. There's a lot of information drinking from the fire hose. So, so next I want to hand it over to Representative Keith Ammon. He's a 3-term state representative from New Boston. And I just have to commend Keith because I think he's going to talk about HB 544. And Keith introduced this bill knowing quite well that, there were a lot of people who were going to attack him for it. And as he said a couple of weeks ago, I'm willing to take some arrows in the back on this one, but I'd appreciate some support. And I think a lot of people have stepped forward to support him in this. But Keith's going to tell us a little bit more about HB 544, where it is, and where it's headed. Keith?
Thank you, Jim. And hello to everyone. Looks like we have about 140 people on this call. That's a great turnout. So hello to everyone in the audience. And I just want to say before I start, I think it was Representative Bob Green that introduced Karlyn to the bill, and we connected that way. So Karlyn, you've been a great help on this bill, and so have your followers on your different social media platforms. So my name is Keith Ammon. I live in New Boston. It's my third term in the House. So I've seen a little bit in the beginning of in 2 terms plus a portion of a third term. My co-sponsors on the bill, I believe, are also on this panel, and that is Representative Glenn Cordelli, who is an education expert, and our majority leader, Jason Osborne. So they're both co-sponsors on this bill. I've gotten a lot of people saying, hey, why didn't you ask me to co-sponsor? And I didn't ask around all that much because I thought it would be so controversial, people might not want to do it. So I apologize for not asking more people to co-sponsor. I probably could have filled up the slate there. I'm going to talk about the bill. You've probably heard in different media outlets about this bill. It's being mischaracterized by mainly our friends on the left. And they've tried multiple different angles of attack on this bill. They treat it as some kind of a sneaky tactic to do something that they don't like. The bill is very straightforward in what it's addressing, and we'll go over that. They attack it as, it's been attacked as transphobic, which I don't understand how that's possible since the bill doesn't involve gender or transgender issues. They've attacked it as dank, racist S word. I think I've heard that one. And then they went to this attack that it attacks free speech. And that one kind of stuck because Republicans, we care about free speech. And this bill, it turns out, doesn't violate free speech. They said it would have a chilling effect in the classroom for discussions about the history of slavery, racial and sex relationships between the sexes and the races. And it doesn't do that either. It doesn't chill classroom discussion. So what I thought I'd do is, I don't know if everyone has a screen big enough to see the bill, but I was going to share the bill and just kind of walk through it real quickly. Let me just do this right. Here we go. All right, so this is the bill, House Bill 544. You can download this from the state website. The name of the bill was given to it by the Office of Legislative Services. It's called Relative to the Propagation of Divisive Concepts. This is really a definition of a list. So I'll just say at the outset, the bill does not name critical race theory in the bill. It doesn't directly address critical race theory. It doesn't even prevent it from being taught or discussed. But what it does do is prevent using taxpayer dollars to force people who work for a government agency or a public university, a public school, an agency that's taxpayer funded, from having to pledge allegiance to these ideas that we're going to go over. That they have to, for instance, take a training. If they don't agree to these ideas, they fail the training. If they do agree to these ideas, they pass the training. That type of thing, where you're subjected to, basically, it's an issue of compelled speech, where you're forced to say things you don't believe. And it's an issue of the right to conscience, where, again, you're forced to, kind of swear to things that you don't believe. All right. So I'm just going to go down the bill. There's a definition of contractor. And then there's a definition, that this list of divisive concepts, and there's 10 of them. I'll read a few of them so you get the flavor. And this list is driving the left crazy. They don't know why they would be for any of these things. And I don't think they actually are, but for some reason, they think that this would shill some kind of diversity training. And there are some out there that use concepts like this to teach the training. So divisive concept, this would be a bad thing, right? One race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. The state of New Hampshire or the United States is fundamentally racist or sexist. An individual, by virtue of his or her race or sex, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. An individual should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment solely or partly because of his or her race or sex. An individual's moral character is necessarily determined by his or her race or sex. An individual, by virtue of his or her race or sex, bears responsibility for actions committed in the past by other members of the same race or sex. And that's an issue of collective guilt. That one kind of gets under my skin the most, is that putting people into groups and claiming that people they have to feel shame or guilt based on actions of members of the group that they're in. And we see that a lot lately. And that violates individualism, where, we're born, in my mind, we're born innocent babes. We come into the world and we should be judged on our actions, not because of who we were born to or where we were born or what sex we were born. And then any individual should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress on account of his or race or sex, meritocracy, or traits such as hard work ethic, or are racist or sexist, or were created by a particular race to oppress another race. And then it talks about race or sex stereotyping and scapegoating. So, while we're on this section of the bill, if people say they have an objection to the bill, the easiest thing to do is cut and paste this text, send it to them, and say, which one of these things do you believe are true? And that usually stops the conversation, because most people, it's in our nature to not believe those things. Now, a couple that I think get under people's skin is this one about New Hampshire or the United States not being basically fundamentally racist or sexist. We hear this term systemic racism, and I've heard it for a few years, right? It's becoming part of our discussion, our political discussions. And most people, I think, hear that term and it sounds innocuous. It did to me. There has been racism in our country. The Jim Crow laws were racist laws that the government enacted. There has been slavery in our country. Those are all historical facts. But when people say systemic racism, what they mean is that the system of our United States, or of our state, or any institution that's part of the government, for that matter, the court system, the police, maybe even our educational system, that they were designed from the start to perpetuate racism and sexism, that's built in to the institutions, and that they continue to do that. And the only way to solve that problem is to fundamentally change the entire system, throw the whole thing out and start over. That's what the extreme radicals are saying when they're saying systemic racism. We've seen statues being toppled over the summer, statues of Abraham Lincoln, and some other figures that obviously weren't racism, but it's about tearing down the system. And in my mind, it's about something bigger. This is kind of my working hypothesis, is the founding fathers created the Constitution, they created the foundations for this country. And rather than attacking the ideas and trying to change the system, and we know the system has the Constitution can be amended, and it has been. there's a process for improving the country that's built into the structure of the system, and the country has improved. Our country is the least racist and sexist country, I believe, in the history of the earth. So that process enables change and advancement. But rather than attack the ideas, they attack the men that created the system, and they label them as white. Some of them did own slaves, but they're trying to discredit their ideas by attacking their character, in a somehow traveling back in time and attacking their character. And it's about changing the system fundamentally. But I'll get off my soapbox and go back to the bill here. Another section is the state of New Hampshire means all agencies and political subdivisions of the state of New Hampshire, and it includes counties, cities, towns, school districts, and the state university system. And then this is the key part here for the requirements for the state of New Hampshire. We went over that definition of what the bill calls the state of New Hampshire. The state of New Hampshire shall not teach, instruct, or train any employee, contractor, staff member, student, or any other individual group, and this is the key phrase, to adopt or believe any of the divisive concepts defined in that list that we went over. Adopt or believe. Those are the key phrases. Requiring them to adopt. And then the second half of that is no employee, contractor, staff member, or student of the state of New Hampshire shall face any penalty or discrimination on account of his or her refusal to support, believe, endorse, embrace, confess, or act upon, or otherwise assent to the divisive concepts defined in that section that we went over. And then it talks about contractors. If a contractor contracts with the state, this provision has to be put into the contract. It talks about basically the Department of Administrative Services. That's kind of the parent executive branch agency that oversees all the other agencies. It talks about them making sure that there's review of diversity and inclusion trainings, that making sure that they don't violate any in that list that we went over. Requirements for state agencies. I'll read this part. This is another key part. The fair and equal treatment of individuals is an inviolable principle that must be maintained in the state workplace. Agencies should continue all training that will foster a workplace that is respectful of all employees. And then it says accordingly. And then each agency head has to develop a policy about this. Agency diversity and inclusion efforts shall first and foremost encourage agency employees not to judge each other by their color, race, ethnicity, sex, or any other characteristic protected by federal or state law. So that's, puts in reasonable guidelines for state agency trainings. And then it goes over a few other things in the bill. I'm just going to skip over, but I want to point you to the general provisions. Number 2, this is near the end of the bill, and it says this: nothing in this chapter shall be construed to prohibit discussing as part of a larger course of academic instruction the divisive concepts listed in that list in an objective manner and without endorsement. So nothing in this bill bans the teaching of the history of slavery, doesn't ban discussing, differences between, cultural differences between races and, where people came from. But what it does do is prohibit, separating people into groups and saying, okay, this side of the room, you were born to be oppressors. The system helps you be oppressors. And this side of the room, you were born to be oppressed, and the system makes you oppressed. And cause that kind of divisiveness in our society, and do it with taxpayer money. That's the key point here. This is putting guidelines on diversity inclusion training, some curriculums, even teaching about critical race theory in classroom. Put some guidelines on it, and that's our job as state legislators. Is we're sort of the board, members of a board that makes adjustments to how the state operates, and that's part of our job. So that covers the bill. I guess I'll mention one other thing. And our state legislature is made up of 400 different people, as you probably know. And we have people from all walks of life, all backgrounds, and it makes for very interesting discussions about different bills because people bring different perspectives to it. We have, in our legislature, we have a former Supreme Court Chief Justice, and his name is Bob Lynn. And he wrote a memo with his opinion about whether or not 544 violates free speech. And it's a 2-page memo. He quotes different court cases, and he describes what the bill does. But the general point of his argument that the bill does not violate free speech is that the First Amendment, and I'm just paraphrasing based on my understanding, I'm not a lawyer, so this is a little over my head, but the First Amendment, we know, protects individuals from the government. The First Amendment gives us the right to say things that the government doesn't like. What the First Amendment doesn't do is give the government free speech rights. So when someone is operating in the capacity of a role within the government, on their free time, they have the same free speech rights that we do. But when they're in the government, operating under the aegis of the government, the First Amendment doesn't protect, what they say, and it's perfectly fine for legislators to put some guidelines on what can be said or what can be taught. And so I think I covered everything, and maybe I'll stick around and take questions near the end. But Jim, do you have anything else you'd like me to go over?
No, I think that covers it, and I'm just going to go back to my deck here, and I think that's a great overview of the bill. So next, I would like to introduce Lily Tang Williams. She is from Ware, New Hampshire. She is an American citizen by choice, moved here from China, and with $100 in her pocket, has since filled a number of important roles, including a U.S. Senate candidate, Colorado House candidate, and currently co-chair of the New Hampshire Asian American Coalition. So, Lily, take it away.
Well, thank you, Jim, for having me, and nice to meet everybody here online. I put 15 slides here because of time limitation, and to show you why, as an immigrant who fled communist China, I feel pretty scared in this country. So this is my typical, when I give a talk, I just gave a talk this morning, Manchester Charter School, to total 300 kids online and some in classrooms. So this is my first information page, and here you can find me if you have questions for me later. And to give you a quick background about me, I was born right before Cultural Revolution. So when Mao died, I was 12. So I was 2 to 12. And after Mao died, another few years later, we still went through all that communist brainwash, indoctrination, rituals, and struggles. And but at least we got to go back to school. So they to understand Cultural Revolution, not what conservatives do, but our kids don't. So I always give them a little background about the Cultural Revolution, lasted from 66 to 76. And it's not a typical war. It is actually the war initiated by a leader against their own people, society, and culture. In order to do this, his purpose, Mao's purpose, is to purge his political enemies because he starved so many people to death because he's failed central planning policies. So he lost some power after the mass famine in China, 20 to 40 million people starving to death. So he was marginalized a little bit, and Mao was not happy about that. So he wanted to start this cultural revolution, calling to destroy the 4 oaths: old ideas, culture, habits, and customs. And he used a typical Karl Marx, the communist method, to basically divide whole Chinese people into 2 groups: oppressors and oppressed. Sounds familiar? And then we have more details. For the oppressors group, then you have 5 black classes. And you see I named here, landlords, rich farmers, counter-revolutionaries, bad influence, and rightists. And how do you define that? It's very subjective, right? Who has the power to define what is a rightist? What is the bad influence of society that he wants to eliminate? Well, leaders do, because Communist Party leaders, none of them was elected by people. So leaders have that power. Mao had that power. Then oppressed groups, called the 5 red classes, poor middle, poor and lower middle class peasants, workers. My parents were government workers at the bottom of this in the city, and I was a red child, so I was red class. Revolutionary soldiers, cadres, basically party officials, and the people who died for the revolution. So the whole country basically had 10 classes fight each other. I remember when I was growing up, they put so much hate into us. And you have no idea that the Black class families, that how much they suffered. I just had some classmates, they were Black classes, so she would never wear a red scarf, which is Mao's Young Pioneer group. And they will be constantly criticized. When you hear about famous class sessions, struggle sessions, you normally get pictures like this, right? They will be normally held in public square places. People all lined up were Black classes, lower their heads, and the red guards hold Mao's portraits and the red flags, and basically ask those people to confess, publicly shame them. They need to self-criticize and do it right way, actively do the right way. Otherwise, they get the rocks thrown at them, and they might go to neighbor camps, re-educational camps. I was very young. I witnessed the struggle session when I was babysitted by my grandmother in Chengdu, which is the capital city of Sichuan province. It was kind of a very, very loud, noisy, Say lots of young people. Mao shut down schools. Schools were closed. So the kids have time in their hands to do class struggles every day. Always raise your face. Have all those big posters on the wall full of slogans. Sometimes it is to, it's like turn on somebody. Some party members, some officials, and some teachers and professors, they were bad rightists. We need to eliminate them. College professors here, president of Beijing University, he was named as a revisionist. Revisionists, according to Mao, are the people who want to have a little bit prosperity, have a little bit private property, maybe a little bit of capitalism, so we can have food to eat instead of starving to death. And then talk about what is the best policies. So if you disagree with the party, even though you suggest them to have a little bit better policies, and you are rightist, and you need to be eliminated and get all the red guards to haze those people to death. If you have a religion, like this is Catholic nuns, or Christians, my family, Buddhist, today Uyghurs, Muslims, it doesn't matter. The only religion they want you to have is communism. And the only God you're allowed to have is Mao. So here's the red guards again. Probably before they burn down the church, they publicly shame those nuns, and they want them to denounce their religion and denounce even Bible. Today, they want to rewrite the Bible to call the Bible with the Chinese characteristics, Chinese characters, whatever that slogan is, sounds very familiar. When I was in middle school, besides the studies, we had to go march to do this kind of military training march, political training all the time. You hold Mao's little red books and Karl Marx portraits. Here's Mao's portraits and red flags, and to chant slogans. and extremely brainwashed. If you do that for 5 straight years, right, you feel like basically Mao was your God. That's his purpose. His 10 years cultural revolution is to make him worshipped by all those young people who were naive, just very idealistic, don't know the history, and believed and trust Mao. Mao totally used them as useful idiots. And I did all that stuff. We had to write diaries, after all the marching, you write diary. What did I learn today, Chairman Mao? And then I was a red child, but say only black children should confess. No, they want to brainwash you all. So red child like me, parents were literally working parents. I had to confess in my diary to say, Chairman Mao, today I did think about something, was not politically correct. I'm sorry, I apologize. So not just black children go through this, and red children too. And you can get criticized by looking pretty, by wanting to date somebody and have a crush on some boys. Low love should be talked about. No dating were allowed. It's all about the hate. It's all about your loyalty to your religious leader, like Mao, a cult, basically, a psyche guy. I can never forget this. During the Cultural Revolution, after the public shaming sessions, if you are really bad guys, they want to get you, they will put you on your military trucks, and they will publicly shame you, drive around in the cities, and then take you to the public shooting place to execute you. I just remember I was a few years old. My memory just started. I was in my grandma's Chengdu courtyard place. I saw a truck like this driving by. Red guards were singing. And I said, where are they going? I was told, those are the bad counter-revolutionaries. They're going to be shot. And I know there's one place in Chengdu, not too far away from us, was always a public execution place. I used to go there with my brothers and uncles to pick up bullets, because after shot, you have bullet shells laying there, and they're made from steel. Remember Mao's great steel production campaign? You can pick up all those bullets, shells, and you can go sell them for a little bit of money as children. Because, hey, they're steels no matter what, even though not so good quality for some, steel production quarters. And all the girls and all the boys as young as those ages, probably this is middle school age, and chanting, marking, saying red revolutionary songs, the whole generation just went nuts. And this is prepared before you actually do class struggle sessions, and you will have those red guards doing red dances and chanting and singing to create this political hostile environment for the black class people to come out and to get publicly shamed, and you want them to denounce themselves. The pressure is so huge for the young people, like some of my friends. They couldn't handle it if they were black classes. They will be pushed to say, denounce your family now, denounce your family. So the black class children will draw the line with their families. I cut ties. I'm going to change my last name from Wang to Chen, because my grandparents were black classes. And so my parents were bad, and I'm bad. See, something's familiar. You have nothing to do with it. Your grandparents were landowners, and you're just a little student today. But because you were born into their families, your history was that, then you were born black. Cannot change that unless you change your name. You come to the red side. You have to cut the line. Some kids turn on their family members, got their mom, dad killed, and they live with that guilt today in their 50s and 60s. Does this remind you of social justice warrior we have in this country? Totally emotional, totally idealistic. It's almost like some kind of religious activity. Long live Chairman Mao, down Mr. Wang, because Mr. Wang's bad, rightist. And look at those kindergarten age kids, talk about critical race theory, starting as young as in kindergarten. Are you kidding me? Look at those kids. He was holding Chairman Mao's little red book, singing a song. After my research about critical race theory and listen to all the Chinese who live in California, New York, tell me about critical race theory, and I also watched those famous people from the left who sell this BS, right? Dr. Candy, Dr. Robin DiAngelo, I watch them on YouTube. I cannot buy it. It sure sounds familiar to me, all their words. Here's some similar features I put together for you. Between the Chinese Cultural Revolution and this one we're going through right now. It's number one, it's always this development of this quasi-religious following of the youth and indoctrinate of the young students. You know why they do that? Because they bet on those youth, have been in the public school since they were 5 and 6, and they were not taught real history. They don't recognize anything. I do. I recognize the terms they use. For example, equity. Carter talked about equity versus equity. I heard that before. Public goods. You were born racist. You were born black. It's all very familiar to me. But lots of people, including college students, and even their parents who are as young as 30s or 40s, they don't know. That tells you why. Why do the Americans lose their way to recognize those communist, Marxist terms, ideologies? Typical. Second, very similar, right? Just like Marx do, Mao did in China, Soviet Union did. They divide their citizens into fundamentally two classes, two groups, oppressors and oppressed. Instead of 5 red and 5 black, I just told you, look at those oppressors today, right? Or if you're white, and now because the Asians are high achieving, we are good in math, we have high income, we are supposed to be categorized with white. So I don't buy that when you talk about all the white supremacists or tech agents. Dr. Karlyn's right. I did my research. The highest crime committed against the Asians today, not just today, from past 10 years, are the people of color, non-aging. Then you have males, conservatives, Christians, and cisgender. Okay, you're oppressors because of, you are privileged. And you were born wealthy, or you were born in a nice family. You were born white. You cannot change your skin color, but you're racist. You might not realize that because it's called implied, unconscious racism. Oppressed, people of color, women, liberals, transsexuals, and poor. So all that, it's so familiar to me how they divide the people. And the ratios that go through with critical race theory, like Dr. Karlyn just showed you. It's just like what the wave went through, okay? If you are black class, you go to room to self-criticize them. They pass you a list. There's a self-criticize list to tell Chairman Mao, tell Communist Party, you black families, you sins, you crimes, you exploited the workers, and you got rich because you use those workers for your profits. Some of those peasants did not want to come out against their landlords because they were just living in peace, one work, one, pay them. But the communists want to put hate in you. You got to actively get up to say, oh, I hate this landlord. Did something. Oh, he did this to me. He said this to me. Then start to raise their fist and criticize them. That's what they do. Chairman Mao said, political power comes barrel of gun. And communism is not love. Communism is all about struggles. That's what he said. You Google it. So to finish with you, here's my contact information. I will welcome your questions. And, of course, my lifetime story takes probably a lot longer than this to tell you, but this is my summaries. And to say this is very dangerous. This ideology is going to be used by Marxists to destroy our fundamental fabrics of our society, our civil organizations, NGOs, churches, and the schools and the capitalism. So when they talk about equal, I even challenged our vice president one time on her Twitter. Equitable outcomes. I said, whoa, that sounds familiar. That's communist. Do you want to debate me? They don't use those terms. Oh, that's communist, Marxist, but they use nice terms to indoctrinate our people. Oh, we'll get there with the same results. It doesn't matter if you work hard or not. It doesn't matter, you know, and your intelligence, your limitations. Every human being is not perfect. All those terms are Marxist terms. Of course, she doesn't want to debate me. Nobody wants to. So that's my presentation. I will be turning back to the Dr. Karlyn, and we'll answer your questions later. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Lily. Yeah, so I think, so again, we're going to move on to Q&A soon. I do want to pass it back to Karlyn because she's going to talk a little bit about how you approach this conversation with people, because it's, you know, I think for some people it's an uncomfortable conversation, or you can expect some pushback sometimes. So Karlyn, can you give people some advice on the best way to share this information and approach the conversation with the people that they know?
A few closing thoughts, and I want to keep this short because I really do want to get to everyone's questions and be able to have a discussion about this. Listen, what Lily just said, I want to emphasize that this is a time that everyone needs to be speaking up and everyone needs to be participating in fighting back. If you have ever wondered what you would have done during the civil rights movement or in Germany in the 1930s leading up to the Holocaust, what you are doing right now in this time is what you would have been doing then. And I do not believe I'm over exaggerating with that. I have been studying this and have been ingrained in this for the past 2 years, and it is escalating extremely quickly right now. So everyone needs to be speaking up, and I would encourage everyone to start to have conversations with your friends, your family members. Find out if these things are going on in people's workplaces. Find out if these things are going on in people's schools. And I think that Keith actually had an excellent suggestion to use actually the language in the bill. And to use, sometimes you can even use that as a jumping off point to say, you know, or even just, you know, starting the conversation of, you know, have you heard about this bill, HB 544? What do you think about it? And using the language of the bill to describe to people what's in it. And, you know, one thing I want to impress on everyone is that it is a very small portion of the population that agrees with this ideology. It's only somewhere around 12%. Sadly, they are extremely loud. And they make you think that they are the majority, but they are not. So starting by speaking up, you know, asking people what they think about the bill, asking them if they support the bill, asking them if they have seen some of these things going on in the schools, asking them if they've seen it in the workplace, asking them if they've read White Fragility or How to Be an Anti-Racist. What do you think about that? That's some of the best ways to start these conversations. You also want to just, you know, be flexible about it. Most people who are into this ideology, they are victims of this ideology. They are not people that are doing this with malicious intent. And I think that that's really important to understand. Most people that agree with these concepts, or that are saying, they might come up to you and say, oh, you have to read White Fragility. It's an amazing book, changed my life. They think they're being good people. They think they're doing the right thing because they've been brainwashed in this, just like the kids in school have been. And this is especially true when we're talking about younger people. Listen, there was a young woman who testified in opposition to this bill in the committee hearing. Her name is Madison. You know, Madison actually started following me around Twitter, harassing me after that testimony. And I was actually grateful she did, because I found out that 17-year-old Madison, who was very composed in the committee hearing when she was testifying, calls herself Maddie the Marxist on Twitter and posts pictures of herself with Mao's little red book. And so these children are victims of this ideology. I don't blame Madison for that. I blame her mother, who is a teacher in, I believe, the Bedford school system, for integrating that ideology into her child. So most people are just victims of this, and they're looking to have these conversations with others. And once you start having these conversations, you're going to realize that people do not agree with this ideology. And so it's a matter of being gentle, of, again, using the very factual language in the bill. I think that that's a great jumping off point to say, do you believe that we should be teaching people that one race is superior to another? Do you believe that we should feel guilty for being born white? Do you believe that men should feel guilty for being born male? Do you believe toxic masculinity is a real thing? Things like that can start as a jumping off point, but everyone's got to be speaking up. And I just want to say one last thing. Jim, I'm going to take over sharing for just 1 second here. I want to give people a place to listen. If you have questions after this webinar or that you want to talk one-on-one, I just want to make sure everyone has my contact information. You can email me at karlyn@zenworkplace.com. And as my own special little personal ask, if you have documentation of this stuff going on in the schools or your workplace, please get in touch with me, because I'm trying to collect as much as I can to show people what's happening. I will protect your identity, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. And if you want to tune in to my YouTube channel, I talk about this stuff almost every single day on my YouTube channel. So it'll give you more things that you can talk about, more things that you can share. I really want it to be a resource for everyone. That's all. Let's do some questions.
Thank you so much, Karlyn. So I'm going to screen share again. I'm going to go through a couple of things very, very quickly. But first, I want to ask Keith Ammon to just briefly tell us, where are we with this bill?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. The bill was introduced back in February. It made it through ED&A, which is Executive Departments and Administration, because the bill deals mainly with government agencies. It came out of that committee, ought to pass on party lines 10-9. And just this week, the bill was added to the budget. So the Finance Committee in the House is preparing the budget. This is a non-germane amendment to the budget. And so the language as written in 544 is now in two places. It's in the original bill, and it's also in the budget. So if the budget passes, 544 will move on to the Senate. Then our next fight will be making sure the Senate keeps the language in the budget. So stay tuned. We're going to vote as a full House April 7th, 8th, and 9th in Bedford Sport Complex. So we'll know more when that happens.
Great. Thank you, Keith. So here is the call to action. We will post this on our website as well, so you will have this information. We urge you to call or email your state representatives. I've highlighted the word politely. I think, very often you will be contacting people who already agree with you on this. That will be especially true if your state representatives are Republicans. Not all Republicans are convinced that this is the right bill. I think we're working on trying to educate those folks and answer their questions. But the important thing is that you do reach out to them, ask them to support the state budget with HB 544 as part of the budget. If you live in their district, make sure you tell them that. Tell them what town you live in, so that they know you are one of their constituents. There is also another component that has been added to the budget, which is revisions to the emergency powers statute and forgiveness of COVID fines. There are a couple of other things as well, but for many of us, those are quite important as well, which is to put some guardrails around the emergency orders statute. So if you want to find out more about that, it's HB 433. Action item 2, call or email the governor. He has said that he would veto it. We'd like to let him know there's a lot of people who care about this. I think he needs to learn more about it. But again, call or email the governor's office, ask him to support HB 544, which would end taxpayer funding of this divisive identity politics agenda. Call or email your state senators. That's going to be an important one. Once this gets past the House, as Keith said, we're going to need to convince them to keep it in the budget or to pass it if it passes as a separate bill. Finally, spread the word. This video will be posted to our website, 603alliance.org. We urge you to share that with your friends. get the word out and encourage them to take these actions as well. If you don't know who your legislators are, you can go to the New Hampshire House of Representatives website, gencourt.state.nh.us, click on members, and then who's my legislator. Next, you can select your town from the drop-down list, and that will give you a page showing you who your representatives are and who your state senator is. I picked New Boston because Keith is from New Boston, so there it is. And that's how you find out how to contact your state representatives. A couple of other ways you can get involved. Get trained. The next slide will show you an opportunity. Subscribe to our email list. We do also have an activist who's working on a postcard campaign to research same-day voter registrations in southern New Hampshire. She is looking for financial help. If you are inclined to do that, send us an email. We will connect you with her. And finally, become a member of the 603 Alliance. It's $26.03, and if you sign up, we will send you a nice lapel pin indicating that you are a member. A couple of weeks ago, we announced a training. This is not organized by the 603 Alliance, but by some friends of ours. It's the Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership. That was scheduled for April 17th. That training quickly sold out. However, we have another friend who has worked with the FACL organization to set up another New Hampshire-based training on April 24th. Details are here. We will send this out. We'll include links with the materials that we send you following the webinar, probably tomorrow. And the 603 Alliance is offering a number of partial scholarships. So there is a cost for that training. I think it's $40 for early registration. If you are short on cash, we're committed to making sure that nobody has to sit out of that training for lack of money. So we can help you out with that. I also want to recommend a strongly recommended video on HR1. This is happening at the national level. Regent University held an election integrity virtual conference. Again, we'll send you that link, but it comes highly recommended from several people who have seen it. So sorry for talking fast, but I wanted to make sure we have a few minutes left for Q&A. And so with that, I'm going to ask Diane if we have any questions that have come in. I have one or two if you haven't got any.
Yeah, no, I've got a bunch of questions here, Jim. And actually, I have several people have asked us the same question. So I'm going to lump those together and give those to the panel first. These are questions that came from Tony Likas, a representative, and Laura Manning, and one other. I'm not sure the question. Yes, okay. Let me get to the question. These people want to know, what is Governor Sununu's objection to this bill?
That's a
Karlyn, do you want to take that one?
Yes, I will take that one. Well, I think his.
Karlyn, you said you'd behave tonight, remember?
I'm going to be very well behaved, Keith. This isn't Twitter, okay? Okay, I'm just going to say this. What I think Governor Sununu's objection is that he wants to get elected to the Senate and he's trying to woo Democrat votes. I think that's what his real objection is. But what he's saying is his objection is that he's objecting to it on the free speech consideration. So essentially the governor is listening to the Democratic talking points that this infringes on free speech. I think Keith did a wonderful job in explaining why the governor is wrong. Really, really wrong. And the fact is, I'll just reiterate this, the government does not get constitutional protections. The citizens get constitutional protections. You cannot compel the speech of your citizens. And frankly, if this type of training is going on in state agencies and the state is compelling the speech of employees, then the state is open to a lawsuit. So that's that. That was good, Keith.
All right, we get a thumbs up from Keith.
Okay, Sue Polidoro is asking. She says she spoke with a teacher at her local school, her school board member about this and asked, was it being taught in the local schools? This would be in the Portsmouth area, I believe. And she was told no.
They're
So
lying.
Sue is asking, how can we tell if this is true?
Yeah. So first off, I do not have direct evidence that it's in Portsmouth, but I would frankly be shocked if it wasn't. So typically school systems will never admit to teaching critical race theory. What they'll say is we're teaching diversity, we're teaching inclusion, we're teaching racial sensitivity. They're going to use any number of other terminology for it, but what you want to make sure you're doing is looking at their assignments and looking at what the teachers are asking them to do. Almost anything having to do with race will have to do with critical race theory at this point. And, there's a difference, right, between teaching that slavery happened in America and teaching that America is a fundamentally racist country. There's a difference between teaching the civil rights movement and teaching that every person who is white is racist. And I think that most people, when they're actually looking at the assignments, they will be able to differentiate. But remember, look for those keywords that I told you. Look for keywords like social justice, power, privilege, oppression, oppressor, systemic racism. Those are all going to be indicators that it's being taught.
Thank you. Another question here from Don, and he's wondering if you believe that this critical race theory was intended to create racial division.
Yes. That's precisely what it's designed to do. And I think that Lily's presentation did a great job of showing that, showing the desirable end result of this. The reason that they talk about systemic racism so much is that they are fundamentally trying to destabilize our systems and our institutions. And, as Keith discussed earlier, the goal is to rip down those systems and those institutions. That's what the goal is, and they're just working their way there. So they are intending to keep racial divisions. It's because the Democratic Party gets a lot of power by being the party that the quote unquote oppressed will vote for. This is how they get the votes from the Black community, from the Latino community, from the Asian community, from the Jewish community, from the LGBT community, is by continuing to stroke these divisions.
Well, I want to add to that. When you look at their terms and how they do it, then you use that America is fundamentally racist, whites are racist, use that to justify they use government force to redistribute wealth, to pay patricians, to give free colleges, to don't have to they even got rid of gifted and talented programs. All the aging parents are so mad because they want to dumb down now on our kids. Quality education is no longer focused on for our schools. So what are they really trying to destroy? If you have good values, you value nuclear families, you face and you work hard, you want to have prosperity, all those values now deemed to be racist. So what do we replace with? What values they want us to replace with? They want us to replace with communism, socialism, Marxism, all in the name of anti-racism and equitable outcomes, emotional learning. All that terms are designed to actually divide and teach our kids guilt and division and hatred. It's very dangerous. I just don't understand why we don't have lots of parents, show outrage, and we probably should.
Well, I think a lot of parents are intimidated because there's a lot of pushback. I know Dan Richards is on the call. He did an interview with Kevin Avard the other day that I've received emails from a bunch of people who really thought that was an outstanding story and an outstanding interview, and he's describing his experiences with the Hanover school system when he started to push back. So that's highly recommended, and we may have him on if we do a follow-up to this one. So somebody used the term the other day, weaponizing the youth, and I think this really is about sort of weaponizing the naivete and the ability to which that they can manipulate children. Diane, do we have, maybe we have time for one more question?
Well, this is not actually a question, Jim. This is a statement from Ted Gorski. And
Okay.
he is offering that he can help with suggestions for people who want to communicate with someone who is supporting critical race theory. And he's given us his name and his contact information. His website is www.getYourEdge.com.
Okay. GetYourEdge.com. Sounds good.
Yes.
All right.
I'd like to add something that now is the time to speak up about these things. If at no other time, it's now. So if you hear about something happening in your school, your neighbor's school, or your friend's school, or university, if you have any kind of evidence of this happening, send it to Karlyn, and she will protect your identity. Because we need, all the local evidence that we can have adds up to a big picture, right? It's not just anecdotal, it's in different places. And because the bill, has a good chance of passing the House in the budget and then on to the Senate, like now is the time to speak up. So I encourage everyone to do that who can.
Okay. Excuse me. I think we'll take one more question. It may be a comment, but Representative Bob Lynn, former Chief Justice of the New Hampshire Supreme Court, has raised his hand, and I want to give him an opportunity to speak. I just need to figure out how to unmute him. So, Representative Lynn, give me just. Oh, it looks like you're all set.
Oh, great, thank you. I won't take a lot of time, but I just wanted to make one suggestion for, there, as I pointed out in the last paragraph of my memo, there is this doctrine, which as a general proposition, I think is a valid doctrine of academic freedom, and not being the government not telling teachers what they can teach. The problem, and there are some cases back in the Warren Court era that kind of support this, but one of the things that those cases really never focus upon, and they were decided before much more recent cases, is this distinction that the Supreme Court has drawn repeatedly between speech that is made by an agent of the government, under the direction of the government, and speech that's not of that variety. And I think that one of the things that is really important to make clear to people who may be critical or doubtful about, is this a good idea, or is there a constitutional problem with this, is this: if it really is true, if it really were true that the government, that is the state legislature or the a municipal school board or whatever, does not have the authority to set the direction of what school teachers or at the college level professors can teach, then that means that they're like an entity unto themselves. They can kind of teach whatever they want. So, for example, one of the things you might say to somebody who's critical about this is, well, wait a minute. If the government can't regulate this and prevent people from teaching these divisive concepts, and I suspect that there's very few people who would say they agree with these divisive concepts. As one of the prior speakers talked, maybe 12% of the public supports this. But one of the things to point out to them is, well, if the government doesn't have the ability to control these divisive concepts, by analogy, that means if there's a professor at UNH or Keene State College or whatever who wants to teach that, the Ku Klux Klan is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and you should join the Ku Klux Klan, support their policies, whatever, then that teacher is perfectly free to do that, and the government would have no ability to control it. It seems to me that that's really, if you put it in those terms to people, that this idea of academic free speech in this context would have no limits, and it would just open up a sort of brand new kind of constitutional right that any educator can say whatever they want and are not subject to control by the school board. That's a very dangerous concept.
Yeah, it's you bring up a very good point, and that's why in the agenda really we call this defunding divisiveness, because essentially these are people who are using our tax dollars to go out and teach concepts that drive people to hate each other or hate themselves or hate their country. So thank you, Representative Lynn, and thank you to everyone, especially to our presenters, Dr. Karlyn Borysenko, Representative Keith Ammon, Lily Tang Williams, and thank you all for hanging in there. I know it's been a little bit of a long session, but hope this was helpful for you. Please watch for the video. We'll send out an email when it's posted, and we strongly encourage you to share it. Follow up on those action items, reach out to your representatives and to the governor, and let's get HB 544 passed in New Hampshire.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, everybody, and good night.
Thank you.